Welcome to Command and Control, a podcast that looks at C2 in the military domain. I'm Peter Roberts, your host for this series. I've been working in national security in uniform and then as a pseudo academic in a think tank for a while, and have been hosting podcast shows for those in the profession of arms for nearly 5 years. For any new show for a national security audience, I think you've got to answer 3 questions in a compelling way. These questions are, what are you talking about? The sort of research question, if you like. Why is the topic important? And thirdly, why now? What gives these conversations and this topic sufficient merit to warrant investment of the audience's time? People in the profession of arms are busy, seriously busy. Try getting into their diaries and you'll see how difficult it really is. And they have limited time to engage with external inputs. I think this topic is one of those that has sufficient importance and relevance to make it really valuable as a conversation starter. This show is sponsored by Systematic.
Systematic are the creators of Citaware, the world's #1 C4 ISR software. We've designed C2 systems for the military since 1986 and supply more than 45 countries worldwide.
So what are we going to cover? Here's my hypothesis that command is human and control has become increasingly technical. We regard the two facets as distinctly intertwined. But are they really? When did control really enter the equation? How has it evolved? What does C2 in contemporary conflict really mean, and has it changed at all? Is it context specific? Is it people specific? Are there elements that are unique to certain cultures, or is there some magic ubiquity to command military functions that allow it to be exercised well across all uniformed people? Now, command itself, I don't know, it's like a bit like porn, right? We know it when we see it, but defining it is a bit difficult. It's an evocative word too, particularly for military audiences. A standard definition is pretty dry, but might be something like the organisational unit over which a military commander has authority. But that's really not it. I mean, at least not to a military audience. Command is a word derived from the Latin mandare, meaning to commit or to trust. It's also where we get the word mandate from. And it's been written about by Caesar, Marcus Aurelius, by Clausewitz, and more recently by both Lawrence Freedman and the pub landlord Al Murray. But it's not simply a Western construction. You can see it everywhere. Command, from Sun Tzu to Mao Zedong to Genghis Khan and Saladin. As a concept, command embodies trust and delegation, orders, loyalty, personality, insight, understanding and wisdom. And it can be done well, and it can be done really badly. Indeed, there's some evidence to suggest that many commanders, particularly those selected in peacetime, are not really very good at it. The great captains reveal themselves under fire, forged in the crucible of combat. And they're not perfect either. Many who excel at risk-taking, inspiring, leading, and turning defeat into victory were, borderline nuts. But there is something that every writer about command has said. The command is human. The art of the commander is creativity, the artistry that cannot simply be scientifically devised or mathematically calculated. It's about finding a way to win within the context of the chaos of any particular battle or campaign. It's also very human because, George C. Marshall said it best. When you are commanding, leading men under conditions where physical exhaustion and privations must be ignored, where the lives of men may be sacrificed, then the efficiency of your leadership will depend only to a minor degree on your tactical ability. It will primarily be determined by your character, your reputation, not much for courage, which will have been established as a matter of course, but by previous reputation you have established for fairness, for that high-minded patriotic purpose, that quality of unswerving determination to carry through any military purpose assigned to you. And command at different levels requires different skill sets. Eisenhower wasn't Montgomery, and neither could have done each other's job as well as the other. The facets of command and the skills, personality and wit to do it well are different at the strategic, tactical and operational levels. They differ depending on the formations being employed. They differ for the enemy being fought. They differ for the type of combat you're engaged in. And they differ based on the era you might be considering. But this series is not solely about command. That might be a bit easy. It's about C2, command and control. And the other part of that duet is the control element, a facet that only really entered into the military lexicon in this guise in the late 1980s. But it's also largely unconsidered anywhere. Control, as the second half of C2, doesn't get a mention from Lawrence Freeman or Al Murray. Indeed, it seems almost impossible to find a definition of it that really encapsulates what it means, or simply to break a separate meaning out of the gobbledygook that has become military doctrine. To me, the military part of C2 means the measures and processes that enable command and orchestration of military action. So what does it mean? Well, it's the assignment of limits, the allocation of assets, and the monitoring of progress necessary to ensure mission accomplishment. And it's run by superior elements over subordinate formations. Operations orders, in ground force terminology, they contain both command, the mission element, and the control measures elements. The processes known as battle tracking are also part of the control function, the monitoring. This might mean how you divide up pieces of the ocean for separate fleets, or between submarines that don't kill each other. On land, it might mean the boundaries between formations, or fire coordination lines, or free fire areas. And in the air, it might be the division between fighter area of responsibility, where different missile systems have responsibility, safe ingress and egress routes for deep strike missions, or simply how to divide civil from military air traffic. And as we have exploited military communications to show near real-time positional information, a sort of situational awareness map of the battle space, we're able to alter these control measures in more and more dynamic ways. This is not to say that control as part of C2 did not exist before the 1980s. Clearly it did. We just didn't take so much effort to define it. What do I mean by this? Think back to the Second Punic Wars in 216 BC and the defeat and destruction of the Roman army at Cannae, which was made possible by the use of pre-planned control measures. And in 1346 at the Battle of Crecy, the English army under Edward, Prince of Wales, had control measures in place for archers to deplete the French cavalry charges before they met the three battles of the English knights and men-at-arms. In both cases, as across the history of wars and combat, control measures have played a part, usually as a plan before the battle, think of Trafalgar, or a series of processes that have been considered prior to fighting commencing. The Mongols, were exceptional at using flags and horns to be more dynamic about how they manoeuvred their mingans and their tumans during cavalry battles, altering the attack vectors of tens of thousands of horsemen at a moment's notice. Yet such dynamic movement and alterations of plans required a really fine set of prerequisites. Foremost, there was trust between the commander and his subordinates, a superbly trained force, and a defined set of signalling. These were rarely in place, Losses to enemies, infighting, personality clashes, terrain, and critically weather all played significant roles in whether dynamic control could work. And often it did not. Processes and procedures became the fallback, particularly for Western militaries, and this was whether in the US Civil War, World War I, or more recent conflicts. The arrival of radio communications did allow progress, complications if you will, to be added to control measures, but the risk-reward ratio still meant that dynamic control measures could never be guaranteed, and the risks of friendly fire were deemed too great in most circumstances. Yet in the 1980s, there was a huge change approaching for Western command and control. It came at the confluence of several factors. The intellectual renaissance of the US military post-Vietnam, the analysis of the 1973 Yom Kippur War, the arrival of secure, real-time and more widely dispersed battlefield communication between units, a Cold War with Russia that looked increasingly likely to be moving towards the outbreak of hostilities, and an overwhelming belief that Cold War allies could not compete against the numbers, scale and intensity of Warsaw Pact forces that they faced in a traditional manner, and against a Soviet way of fighting that had outwitted, outgunned and outflanked Western commanders. All of these factors resulted in the arrival of a new fighting doctrine that required coordination and deconfliction between different arms of the military and between services. That doctrine, air-land battle, had two versions, the US Army version and the air-land battle 2000, the sort of stretch target. Both these had their origins in the process established by US General William Dupuy to overcome what he saw as a situation of inevitable defeat by Warsaw Pact forces, given the failure to grow mass or to recapitalise Allied force in a way that would give them at least a fighting chance. The one area that Dupuy saw that retained some advantage was in aircraft and advanced munitions. That and the weakness of the Russian plans for the European invasion were the origins of air-land battle, a battle plan that envisaged using close coordination of air power and land forces to defeat Russian operational maneuver groups in the deep battle. Now, I'm skipping over how air-land battle came about, and it is a fascinating story in itself. But an important factor here is how the doctrine evolved from one of tactics to one of deep operational battle space coordination. Ironically, this concept was taken from Russian military theorists Svechin and Chuchalevsky. As outlined in the original pitch, successfully implementing air-land battle required brilliant logistics, fantastic engineering, air power, precision, and ammunition at a scale almost unimaginable to war planners a few years before. And critically, it required much greater delegation to frontline commanders, itself requiring better control measures between formations and services. This final part was the emergence of control into C2 as we know it today. Since 1984, when air-land battle became formalised as NATO doctrine, command might not have changed a lot in Western interpretations. Control measures, however, have continued to become more complex, enabled by real-time communications, accurate real-time situational awareness, and the arrival of mass data inputs. Control has moved from process and pre-planned responses to a very dynamic method of orchestrating the battlefield. Or at least it has in theory. How much of this really translates to a modern contemporary battlefield is one of those things I want to look at. Do dynamic control measures really work on a battlefield where the EM spectrum and communications are not just connected, but denied? How does that change the command relationships in warfare, not just in exercises? So the second big question I said we had to justify is really what are we going to be talking about? And I'm not intent on pushing the conversations we'll have into developing a beautiful definition of C2, nor am I really driving towards lots of historical examples of command and control, the origins, the evolution, and the mistakes made along the way. Rather, I'm interested in what makes C2 successful on the battlefield rather than the lab. And I think that runs from the top of political decision makers to the lowest levels of delegation. It also requires us to have conversations about the future of technology. Listen, you'll no doubt have heard politicians and evangelists talk about how artificial intelligence, AI, will change everything we do, including command. I want to get into some of that too. The realities of that technology, but not the hyperbole. And so I'm going to talk to some AI gurus as well as academics and field commanders. But we only have 8 episodes funded in this series, so we really need to focus. And I'm going to try and steer us into 3 key aspects. 1. The thesis that command is human and control is technical or technological. That may have merit. It may not as well. So what aspects of C2 make a commander and therefore successful on the battlefield? The second area I want to look at is what do current conflicts, wars and combat experience tell us about C2 systems that both work and are successful? The third question is about how technology is changing command and control. Specifically whether AI has the potential in reality, not theory, to replace a human as the commander, and why would we go down that route? I'm sure, as always, we'll get diversions and diverted as we get into the conversations. We're going to try and look at these points specifically as we select and talk to guests, and we have some world-class people lined up to talk to. That brings us to the final big question that I said we had to justify, right? Why is it important? And why now? On that first point, the importance, it's rarely in doubt. Everyone loves to talk about command as some kind of magic, the kingfisher moments for commanders, the talent of brilliant generals, the maverick who comes good in battle. These stories never grow old, right? And few would doubt the importance of that element. But it is the control part of C2 that makes these conversations important now. There are a myriad of promises around integration, fusion, multi-domain, disaggregation, dispersal and JADC2 that are worrying to the pragmatist in me. I mean, sure, if 100% of the assumptions made in these models work, the West will continue its undisputed superiority over adversaries. Yet if just a little bit of these don't deliver, we're going to be in a very different world of pain, just as we found in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they were definitely not near-peer competitors. One of the key aspects of the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine and subsequent combat has been around the conduct of command and control on a contemporary battlefield against a peer adversary. Some of the Ukrainian experience have been recognisable, right? The use of mission command, of delegation and empowerment, trained and tested commanders able to adapt their approach to the realities on the ground, deft decision-making and a clear set of political directions. Other elements of military C2 in Ukraine differ from Western expectations and recent experience. A contested and in some cases denied electronic spectrum, negating the ideas of the connected force. The need to hastily assemble a robust system for command across a huge geographic area, to huge quantities of information from diverse sources in a wide array of formats, cohere inputs into a recognisable and useful picture that can be disseminated in all or parts. Now, some of the lessons, some of this knowledge has been passed to national security professionals across allied states so they too can learn the lessons from the contemporary battlefield. Yet it's not really in a single place, nor in a format that military and political leaders and operators access regularly and easily. And that's my aim for this series. Let's dispel some myths, reinforce good practice, and learn lessons from multiple campaigns. So join us as we talk C2 with people who are genuine experts in their respective fields. You can listen to the show on any of your podcasting apps. Be sure not to miss any episodes by subscribing to the show and send us your comments and feedback. You can find us on Twitter at Tango Mike Whiskey Podcasts. We'll be hosting a live show as well at DSEI in London in September. Come along and meet the team and a special panel that'll try to get to answer some of your questions.
Systematic. Join your partners and allies already using our cutting-edge Citaware suite for their C4 ISR needs.
Thanks for listening.